Well, let me introduce our panelists. I think that they probably don't need too much of an introduction, but let me do it anyway. First, Senator Mike Fesi. Thank you. Representing District 20, Representative Beryl Amedee. District 51, Senator Blake Miguez. District 22, Rep. Kathy Edmonston. District 88, Rep. Bryan Fontenot, District 55. And my partner and co-host, Chris Alexander. He's with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group. Am I ringing? No? Okay, cool, it's just me. All right, well, we're gonna have a lot of fun tonight, so I hope y'all are ready for that. We have some good questions. Y'all brought some really great legislation this year that we have a lot, that we have to be proud of. So we're really happy to see that we came out with some big wins at the end of the first 6 months of session, to having a conservative legislature, a conservative governor. So we'll just get into the questions. I'll ask y'all if you would try and keep it to like 3 to 4 minute answers where possible, because we have a stack of index cards already, and I think it is growing, so we'll want to get to as many questions as possible. All right, first up, Senator Mike Fesi, you're in the hot seat. Senate Bill 436, your bill requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. Would you tell us about that? But also, I have a question that goes along with it. The effective date is January 1st, 2025. Why is that? We obviously have the most important election of our lifetime coming up in November. Is there anything preventing the Secretary of State from beginning implementation now?
Thank you. And the bill, was questioned quite a bit. Why do we need it? Because it's in our Constitution. But I felt the way the judges are now ruling and saying, it's in the Constitution, but it's not in law. So are you really interpreting it correctly? And so I felt, well, let's put it in law, and that fixes that question so the judges can't question it. Now, the thing is I wanted it to be in place prior to the November election, but it just was impossible, according to the Secretary of State, that they could have everything in place. And part of the problem is because they got so many lawsuits flying right now on how must we, make sure or make someone prove that they're a citizen of the United States. So that's the big question. That's the problem. I think they got ways of doing it that's fairly simple, but it's been a lot of kickback. Even some of the conservatives were kicking back a little bit. So we went ahead and fell back and got it as of January the 1st. But hopefully, at least the word is out and we can pretty much implement it, because it's still a law that you need to be a U.S. citizen to vote in a federal election. But we were just trying to make sure if there was a question that the law's in place. So hopefully the state of Louisiana is pretty much strong enough to make sure we can get that, make sure that everybody who votes is a U.S. citizen.
Thank you, Senator Fesi. I'm going to play a little bit of hardball tonight. Not all hardball, just a little bit. All right. Next, Senator Miguez. You brought Senate Bill 208, which prohibits the creation of illegal alien sanctuary cities in Louisiana. Would you tell us about that, and in practical terms, what is that going to mean for New Orleans?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here tonight. Again, my name is Senator Blake Miguez. I represent Iberia, St. Martin, and Lafayette Parish. It's great to be over here down the bayou visiting with you all. That legislation that I passed is just common sense legislation. It had been in place in a number of our surrounding states, and unfortunately we had Governor John Bel Edwards as our governor prior, who vetoed this legislation. So that, along with a long list of other pieces of bills that I wanted to bring back, I brought forward. And it's very simple. It bans sanctuary cities here in Louisiana. So it bans local government authorities from basically prohibiting police departments under their jurisdiction from cooperating with the federal ICE to arrest illegal immigrants and deport them back to their country of origin. Look, our state is a state of law and order. We're not a sanctuary for rule breakers and lawbreakers. And I say that very lightly. We have a problem at our southern border. We have over 8 million people who have entered this country illegally over the last 3 years. And what's entering the country are murderers, rapists, illegal drugs like fentanyl, which are killing our children. And the last thing we want to be seeing in Louisiana is have cities in Louisiana that have sanctuaries and protect these individuals. Some of these individuals move from state to state committing murders. And unfortunately, New Orleans has adopted a policy like this. They will no longer be able to have a policy this way. And I wrote the legislation in a fashion where it's constitutional. It falls in line with their consent decree. There was a number of hostile amendments that came across every part of the process. And this bill was attacked by mainly delegation members from New Orleans, and we fended it off. And we're happy that we actually have a governor that's willing to take action. We have a governor that used to be the chief law enforcement officer of this state, a governor that's really to take bold action and put public safety first. And that's what the legislation did. And a good thing is we had a complementary piece of legislation from Senator Valerie Hodges, which went a step further, very similar to what they have in Texas, which basically put a border compact in place where we can actually start looking for illegal immigrants and working with other states to protect our border and deport them. So we're waiting to see from the U.S. Supreme Court if that one will be constitutional, but I know my law is definitely constitutional. I apologize that it took so long. Blame it on John Bell Edwards. Thank you so much.
We got plenty to blame on him, but we're clawing it back. We're clawing it back. Rep. Amedee, House Bill 357 is your bill that restricts central bank digital currency from being used in a commercial deposit account. Can you talk to us kind of about how that works in practical terms, and does this mean that we're safe from CBDC in Louisiana?
The short answer is yes, for now. But yes, I'd be happy to. This was a bill that I brought back because we had passed it previously, but of course our former governor vetoed it. And this bill would protect Louisianans from a central bank digital currency when the federal government issues one by putting a pause on the implementation in Louisiana, which would give us enough time for the legislature to actually set the boundaries and make the rules for how one would function in Louisiana. Now, the bill, it seems complicated because unless you're someone who deals with commercial deposits, that sounds like foreign language to most of us. The bill actually would not prevent you or me personally from dealing with central bank digital currency if we want to. It simply changes the definition of commercial deposit account so a central bank digital currency can't be used as one. Why did we do it that way? Well, because you can't actually make a law that prohibits something that doesn't exist yet. And so in the Uniform Commercial Code, the definition that was adopted works with the language that we put in this bill so that we are actually prohibiting something that's on the books right now. By doing this, I call it a surgical strike, and it simply does provide us that window of opportunity. So yes, it would actually limit someone from using a central bank digital currency as collateral in a commercial deposit account, but that's okay. We don't really want a central bank digital currency to have a foothold here to begin with, because this would be how a federal government would try to regulate the money that we have and tell us when we can spend it, where we can spend it, how much we can spend, or even how much we have in our account. So we don't want any federal government, any government at all, to be able to do that. We want to be able to be free to control our own funds. We want to be able to spend it as we desire, on what we desire. We don't want somebody saying, well, Beryl can't fill up her gas tank this week because she drove too much last week, and that's not good for the environment. So that's the reason for the bill, and that's a little bit about how the bill works. If it seems confusing or complicated, don't worry about it. Just know that it's a placeholder, and it limits a central bank digital currency, when the federal government implements one, from being utilized in Louisiana unless and until the legislature gets to set the boundaries for how one is going to work here.
Thank you. Y'all are doing a great job. Okay, Rep. Edmonston, you're in the hot seat. House Bill 47. This bill has had a storied past. Took a long time to get here. And it establishes the requirement that parents receive notification of their right to opt out of vaccinating their children. Representative Jessica Domingue put an amendment on the bill that a lot of people here and across the state were really upset by. Would you explain the bill and what the amendment would have done to it and how it got removed? I think the gentleman to your right had something to do with that.
Yeah, thankfully, Senator Miguez. Yeah, House Bill 47, I think it's the third time that I've brought the bill. I just told Bryan we can blame everything on Governor Edwards. I mean, he vetoed it twice,
Yeah.
and then we went into an override session and only missed the override, as y'all can remember, by Senate, I'm sorry, yeah, by 2 votes. So basically what the bill does is very simple. We have in statute already and have had for a number of years that if you choose not to vaccinate your child and you're going to enter a public school system, that you have the right to opt out. That's already in statute. The problem is, for whatever reason, parents didn't know it. School systems really didn't know it. If they did know it, they weren't letting parents know it. So what we felt we wanted to do 3 years ago is to just a transparency bill that says we're going to let parents know that when you send home something about the required vaccination school, you also send home something about the fact that you have the ability to opt your child out of vaccines. That's any vaccine. And we know that there are, I might not get this right, but over 100 vaccinations for children these days. And I don't want to go into the resolutions I have, but we've got to look into what is going on with our children. As you know, I have a resolution for autism. We have so many children that are diagnosed with autism. There's something up, and we've got to figure out what it is, and we'll do that. But at any rate, that's what the bill does. And what was the second thing that you said?
The amendment.
Oh, the amendment. Okay, well, so this is Representative Domingue's area, isn't
It is.
Okay. Well, I think maybe she didn't know what she, I don't know. I just know that she proposed an amendment, and what it said was, if you want to opt your child out, that's okay, but you need to see a doctor in order to do that. And so that strips basically what the statute itself says, because that doesn't, in statute doesn't mention anything about a doctor. It just says, if you write a simple statement saying, I want to opt my child out, that I can do that. So we had some asleep people that day. We had a lot of votes for it. So it passed by 1 vote, I think. And so thankfully for Senator Miguez and Senator Hodges, we got that stripped off in Senate Ed. And then we got it passed on the Senate floor. And so thankfully it's now in statute, and we had our bill signing yesterday. And so I think it's a real win. I've had so many people from all over the state, parents that are just very thankful for the fact that we finally got that through.
Yeah, thank you. It's so important for parents to know their rights. All right, Representative Fontenot, next up. Okay, you brought House Bill 128, and I can't describe this in a short way, so I'm going to describe it in the shortest way I possibly can. Your bill enhanced penalties for convicted felons who are out on probation, and basically, if they are found guilty of carrying a firearm, which is a crime, they have to serve time for that, and they have to serve time, as I understand it, for violating their parole or their probation. Tell us a little bit about why you brought the bill, and then also, will the legislature be looking at the role of rehabilitation in ensuring that when these men and women who are convicted of crimes come out of jail, they have the support and the opportunity they need to be productive members of society?
Yes, certainly. So before I start, I think we missed this, and I want to take an opportunity to thank Sheriff Saunier for allowing us to use his facility. For those that don't know, Tim and I have been friends for quite some years. He served in the military in multiple active duty roles, and truly, of all the elected officials I know, one that truly believes in his oath of office and standing for our Constitution. So we appreciate your service, Sheriff.
That's right. Thank you.
And just in short, in the civics lesson, in the three branches of government, so often the legislative body gets wrapped in to trying to curtail the role of the judicial system. So to walk you down the path to how we get there, I got to take you to where many of these bills have originated, and that's in the city of New Orleans. Someone commits a crime, and that crime prohibits them from possessing a firearm after they are convicted. But the conviction, the judge only sentenced them to probation. So they didn't have to go to jail, but they were on probation, or they could be on parole. And the crime says you cannot possess a gun. While out on probation or parole, and I want you to know, we just gave them a favor. We told them they didn't have to go to jail. While out on parole, they commit another offense and they have a gun. They've illegally possessed a firearm. The issue we had in the city of New Orleans is the judge on the second charge, once they've been out on probation or parole, he would run their sentence concurrent. So if all they had to do was serve 5 years on the first term, they would only serve 5 years. So essentially, a convicted felon is walking around with a gun and he's committing more crimes, but he never really serves more time. So again, in the separation of the branches of government, sometimes you got to be cautious of how you tell judges what to do, but unfortunately, we have judges that can't follow the rules. So what this bill says is if you're out on probation or parole and you commit a crime with a gun, the mandatory sentence for illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon is 5 years. It says that that sentence has to run consecutive to whatever time you're on probation or parole. So if they're out on carjacking and they got 10 years to serve and they commit a second crime, they have to go back and serve this 10 years. And under my new bill that the governor signed, they have to go and serve the additional 5 years for illegal possession of a firearm. Now, of all the things we've done in criminal justice, Chairman Villio brought the most important bill. In 2017, John Bel Edwards walked around this path that said, hey, Louisiana, you're the highest incarcerated state in the union. And he's right. But I want you to know, for 43 years running, we've been the highest crime. So if you believe that Sheriff Saunier is doing a good job, but he probably should have a lot of criminals incarcerated because we have an astronomical amount of crime. John Bell takes us down this path that we're going to let nonviolent offenders out. I want you to know that 40-something% of them reoffended in the first year, and several of those quote-unquote nonviolent offenders, they committed murders. But that's not what's really important. Under that, in 2017, if you were committed of armed robbery of a bank and you were sentenced to 10 years, you'd be lucky if you served 2.5 years. Today, it doesn't matter what crime you get sentenced to, domestic violence, theft of bubble gum. You got to serve 85% under new legislation that we passed under Jeff Landry. We want whole criminals accountable for their actions. But let's go to the last question you had was about rehabilitation. As a former law enforcement professional, the first thing they tell you about the corrections is that it is rehabilitation. It's not really about incarceration, it's about rehabilitation. We invest in those dollars, and that is, in 2017, one issue that I think was somewhat successful. Every person that goes to the Department of Corrections now, whether they serve with Sheriff Saunier, any place, they go to a reentry program, and Tim does this here. We ensure that we try to get them a GED. We try to give them a trade. Sheriff Saunier has probably the largest work release in the state of Louisiana right here. He's got 300 plus inmates out in jobs making money to pay the way in prison so you don't have to pay them. Those are the programs that are successful, and we must continue to invest in those programs. And I've said this from 1997 when I got out of the police academy. If you incarcerate someone and you put them in prison and all they have in their pocket is $1, and 10 years later you open the gate and all he has is $1, he is absolutely going to reoffend. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He is a survivalist and he has to reoffend. So the goal has to be to educate, give them a work release where they can create dollars and have money when they get out, and then follow them for some time to ensure they get a job and they become acclimated to society. But that's where it stops for me. When you reoffend, you got to go back and serve your time. And that's basically what the bill was, to ensure they serve their time. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris, you and I waded through a lot of bills this session, but I'm looking for you to give us some examples of legislation where Louisiana is leading the way in the nation.
Thank you all for having me this evening. You're right, Danielle. I think we went through about 160 or close to it, very critical items of legislation that went down this past session. And I think that we got a lot of good things done. My group is Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, and I'm going to be quite frank. I am not an elected official, but we keep our eyes on elected officials in the legislature to make sure that the way they vote in the legislature, what they support and what they oppose, is consistent with the principles on which they ran for office. And that is critically important because there are times, and I'm fortunate to say that that's not true of anyone with whom I'm sitting at this table up here, because these individuals are all staunch constitutionalists, staunch conservatives. I can tell you I have not agreed with every vote. Any of them, well, couple of them, I've agreed with everything they've done. A couple of them I agree with most of what they've done. But the fact of the matter is, we keep a very close eye on them. The votes made in committee on critically important issues, the votes made on the floor, and we record those votes, publicize those votes, so that constituents can make their own decisions about whether or not they're being properly served by their elected officials. So that's what we do, and that's what we've enjoyed doing. You asked me if we had had passed some things this session that were very, very instrumental and sort of cutting edge throughout the nation. The first thing that comes to mind is SB 133, which is Senator Thomas Presley's legislation. Hugely important piece of legislation that Presley navigated. He's from my neck of the woods up in Shreveport. Navigated this legislation brilliantly through the legislature, and it simply prohibits, from this point forward, the World Health Organization, United Nations, or any other international bureaucratic health organization from dictating how this state is going to respond to an emergency health pandemic. We're never going through in this state what we went through in 2020 with all of the the aftermath and the businesses shutting down and all the stress imposed on families. It was a disaster, and we're never going through that again. Senator Presley did a great job on that. I would say with respect to transparency, there was a great bill by Senator Mike Johnson that will allow and require, in fact, live streaming of all local and municipal government and school board meetings, so that parents who can't be there or concerned citizens who can't be there can watch it live stream. Some of the most important business that is taken care of that concerns you happens right here in your parish, right before your municipal boards and governing authorities. So to have the opportunity to watch that live stream, really know what's going on, is very important and is a great step in transparency. I think that I have to say that there was one bill that came up, House Bill 461.
Chris, we're going to come back to that.
All right. Okay. Well, those are the two bills right there that I would say, and there are others that really put Louisiana on the cutting edge of, first of all, sovereignty with regard to how we respond to health pandemics, and secondly, transparency in government affairs and government processes.
Yeah, and I also want to take the opportunity to add on to that and mention House Bill 71 that was brought by Representative Dodie Horton, and I know, Kathy, you were very instrumental in that, bringing the 10 Commandments to all of our public schools and college classrooms. That is leading the nation, absolutely.
Outstanding, and don't let anybody tell you that bill violates the Constitution. Because the way that it is written, it absolutely does not violate the Constitution. The first Bible commissioned in the United States was commissioned by the United States Congress, and for the first 160 years of this country, the Bible and the 10 Commandments were required reading in public schools. So I think it would be quite a surprise for our founders if someone made the argument that posting the 10 Commandments in public schools in Louisiana is a violation of the Constitution. It's not. It's a very good bill, and I'm so glad that it got through.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to come back around to you, Senator Fesi, and I'm just going to keep you in the hot seat. You're such a nice guy. You can take the heat. All right. During the special session on congressional redistricting, there was a bill on closed primaries that would have strictly made it so that primaries for Republicans were only for Republicans, primaries for Democrats were only voted in by the Democrats. You brought an amendment in the Senate that carved out state legislators from being included in the closed primary system and made it so that non-affiliated and independent voters could participate in party primaries even though they're not in that party. Where were you coming from on that? Could you give us some background?
Okay, working the bill and trying to find out how the votes would be, without doing that amendment, the bill would have never passed at all. So I figured that was a start. You know, it's not exactly what we wanted, but sometimes I always said you got to take a bite of the elephant, not eat the whole elephant. So basically, that's how that amendment got put on and why it was put on.
So it's a good start, step in the right
Yes,
direction.
good start.
Fontenot, you wanted to add something to that?
So one of the issues about closed primaries is that the Republican Party has failed us. In Lafourche Parish, Lafourche was second in the number that voted for Donald Trump. They voted at 73% for Donald Trump. It's still registered 67% Democrat. Those people where I represent in Choctaw, Bayou Buff, Kramer, they vote 100% for Donald Trump and they registered 95% Democrat. They won't be able to vote. So one of the things I think Senator Fesi and I spoke about is people who want to go and vote. When we start talking about the bayous of Terrebonne, probably still, a lot of you in here, if we looked at your card, you're voting Republican, but you're still registered Democrat. You hadn't been told how to change your party. So until the Republicans start educating people and coming out in public and say, if you want to vote for President Trump, you have to change your party. So that was going to affect many of us, and some of us could have not got reelected because the people can't vote for us because they're still registered majority Democrat in Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish.
Good answer. All right. Okay, next up, Senator Miguez, also a very nice guy who deserves a tough question. During the special session on crime, you brought a bill that limits liability for concealed carriers who use their firearm legally in self-defense, essentially shielding them from civil lawsuits. But it only applies to permitted concealed carriers. Why is that, and will you bring the fix next session so there's equal treatment under the law for constitutional concealed carriers, which you led the way on, and permitted concealed carriers?
Thank you so much. So as she mentioned, we had a special crime session, and I brought, I think, a landmark piece of legislation called constitutional carry that allows citizens who are adults and law-abiding in Louisiana to carry a firearm for self-defense purposes for themselves and their family in line with our Second Amendment constitutional rights without needing any government permission. And it's just the same restrictions and rules that apply with concealed carry permit holders. So this bill had been something we had been trying to work on for a number of years. Unfortunately, again, Governor John Bel Edwards had vetoed the legislation. Back in 2021, we went to a veto override session, and at the time, the Senate wasn't as great as it may be, a lot better today, and they came a few votes short and were unable to override the governor at that time, the legislature. So we had to think of innovative ways on how to pass this legislation. There were some law enforcement groups who had been strongly opposed to the legislation in the past, like state police and sheriff's association, some of those, although their membership in the sheriffs sort of had a mixed bag feeling about it. We worked really hard to educate law enforcement community and to educate stakeholders on how important this legislation was and how it would help deter crime, how it would not make their jobs more difficult, how it would actually improve and make public safety increased. So we got to a point where we were trying to work out all the different issues about the bill. One of the most important things to me was to bring one of the strongest constitutional carry bills in the entire country. That's why our constitutional carry bill was brought at 18 years old. That's why our constitutional carry bill was brought without any type of extra requirements like training. Although I'm in the firearm industry, I'm a former world champion pistol shooter. I was on a reality TV show that dealt with firearms. Guns have been a part of my life, my entire life. I am a strong advocate of gun education and gun safety, but you can't put hurdles and requirements on constitutional rights, right? But we also encourage individuals to get training, like the Louisiana Firearm Safety Awareness Act, which we have on State Police's website, to get that training. Well, state police had sort of some issues potentially with the bill because, as you know, they receive about, Bryan, $4.5 million, $7 million now, per year on concealed carry permit holders. And they were sort of uneasy about, well, if we do constitutional carry, that fiscal note would reduce and they wouldn't be able to fund their department properly. So while we wanted to make sure that state police would feel we can ease them into this bill and get them to understand that this would not threaten their permit fees, as well as trying to encourage safety training, the governor came up with the idea of SB2, which is what the question's about. And what SB2 does is it provides the first in the nation's civil immunity in statute. So if a bad guy comes, the perpetrator, and you have to unfortunately use your gun in self-defense, if you were cleared criminally, if you were doing everything right, you had no gross negligence, no intentional acts, you have a civil immunity. And the way we wrote the bill was you have to have a concealed carry permit to do so or be current or former military and law enforcement. And to answer your question, that was to encourage individuals actually to go out and get their training and actually get their permit. Because if you have a concealed carry permit, there are some benefits. You get a civil immunity under the law. You also get a quick background check when you're trying to purchase a firearm. You get reciprocities with other states that don't have constitutional carry. And you get some great training and you get to learn when and how to use your firearm. But I'm never going to make you required to do that. So this is a process on SB2 where I know some of the advocates would like to see this opened up to the constitutional carry folks. It's just not the appropriate time now because when we pass the legislation in January, the bill doesn't go into effect until July 4th, which is coming up, and I can't wait for that to happen. And there was a period at which we had to make some adjustments. I brought some cleanup legislation to actually improve the legislation even further, but we have to make sure this legislation is implemented. We have to make sure our law enforcement community becomes comfortable with the bill. They understand the fiscal impacts are not as great as they thought. We got to make sure everyone in our community understands that this will not turn into the Wild Wild West. And once we get an idea and they're able to absorb it and understand it, and some of these fears are diminished, then we can have a conversation about opening it up. But at the present time, it's sort of I hate to say it, but it's sort of a deal that was made to get certain individuals at a neutral position so we can have one of the top five strongest constitutional carry legislations in the entire country. And look, it is a process. We have Governor Landry, we have a supermajority of Republican legislators in the House and the Senate, and we made tremendous progress on that bill. And we're going to continue those conversations moving forward. Hopefully we get to that spot where we can make some changes to it.
Thank you.
So
we're in the warming up period.
What's that?
We're in the warming up period.
Yeah, we're still in the dating phase.
Perfect. Okay, Representative Edmonston, you have been speaking very passionately about fighting against the spread of the legalization of marijuana in Louisiana. Would you tell us about your perspective on that, and are you working on any legislation for next session?
Well, I can tell you that several of us are talking about legislation for next session, and I can just tell you my personal feeling, and that is that I am not for recreational marijuana. I voted for medical marijuana because I do believe that it has its place. But if people don't recognize there's a drug epidemic in this country, they're deaf, dumb, and blind. And I believe, and this is throughout my lifetime, and way back when I smoked marijuana, and I know that it is a pathway to other drugs. Our children are compromised. They're compromised on every front. And I just do not believe that we need to entertain that now. I believe that we have a will of some people in the legislature, and I'm not saying that it won't happen, but it won't be with my vote.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, Representative Amedee, you brought House Bill 866 this session. It would have prevented any entity, private or government, from discriminating against someone based on their personal medical decisions. This bill failed on the House floor. Would you talk about what the bill would have done, and will you bring it back next year?
Sure, I am happy to talk about that one. I would like to bring it back next year. We'll work on wording based on some of the arguments that were so difficult to overcome this year. I thought we had made it pretty clear, but apparently people didn't agree, and that's why it didn't have enough votes to pass. The bill would protect people in their medical decisions. It would say that employers couldn't mandate that you have certain vaccines or certain medical procedures. I'm trying to remember if it's been a few weeks, if this was the bill that also allowed for someone to sue if they were required to have a procedure or an immunization. It was the bill? Okay. So if you have a job and your employer requires you to, let's say, have a COVID shot, although the bill was not specific to COVID, and you were injured by that, you would be able to sue your employer for having mandated that. And this was why entities like LACAG, the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, fought so hard against the bill, because anytime you put into a bill something that would allow a person to sue their employer, LACAG goes nuts. I've spoken with them on this bill and on others over the past few years about their position, because I've told them that I am all for business. I'm a business owner. I have employees. I am pleased to pass legislation that helps businesses. My special focus is small business, because small business is like the backbone of the economy. But when it comes to your personal body, I tell people, you only get one body and you have to live in it all your life. No one should be able to dictate to you what you must inject into your body, or any medical procedure or any drug. No one should be able to require that. Not your employer, not your school, not your government, no one. It's your body. So this was the basis of that legislation. This is the passion that drives me to carry bills like this, because I really believe, and I will not move off of that. That is a foundational principle. Some people call it bodily autonomy, and that's great. Whenever I start using words like bodily autonomy, suddenly I get phone calls and emails from people who say, hey, that's great, we support your bill, because they think that it also applies to abortion. But I'm hoping that the act of the Supreme Court last year took care of those arguments. I don't believe that you have the right to murder someone else. And so when a woman is carrying a baby, that baby is not her body. So don't be afraid if you hear that Beryl Amedee is carrying a bill about bodily autonomy, that Beryl wants women or anyone to be able to do whatever they please with their own body. Remember that Beryl knows that a baby is a separate person, and that baby has its own body too, and I'm all for protecting that baby's rights too.
Thank you, Beryl. Okay, Representative Fontenot. Maybe another tough one. Okay, in the House Criminal Justice Committee, you voted for Representative Amedee Landry's bill that would have significantly restricted the right to carry a firearm near parade routes and any permitted event, which would have included festivals and protests. It would have only allowed permitted concealed carriers to carry in those areas lawfully. What was your reasoning for that? Because I know that you are pro-constitutional carry.
Yeah, so like Senator Miguez, I brought this constitutional carry bill for us the last 3 years, but under the current law, if you have a concealed carry permit right now, you cannot carry at a parade. It's in the law. So all Representative Amedee Landry's bill was doing, she went further than that though. She said if you're constitutionally carrying, you can't carry within 1,000 feet of the parade. That bill was amended. And while we were in committee, I took my phone and we went to Canal Street in New Orleans, where the trolley passes, and we measured on my phone the width of the street, and it's only 50 feet wide both ways. So we amended the bill to say you couldn't carry a firearm constitutionally within 100 feet of where the parade passes. Now I say that because unlike probably every other person besides Bacala and Wiley, I've had to work Mardi Gras. And if you ever had to be there and you're there with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, yes, I'm not worried about good guys with guns. I'm not. What I'm worried about is, as a police officer, I can't even hear my radio. It's screaming in my ear trying to tell me something, and one of you step out with a pistol, you're gonna die. The police officer that has no time, you can't hear to react. So there has to be a delicate balance, and I said this this session. Sheriff Saunier said this. He was asked several years ago about the constitutional carry bill, and the sheriffs were opposed. All right, many were opposed, but Tim said, when I raised my right hand to uphold the laws and the constitutions of this state and this country, I couldn't pick and choose which ones I wanted. The Second Amendment is very clear. The right shall not be infringed. But in some instances, common sense has to prevail. Same thing like Senator Miguez's bill about civil immunity. The goal was to push people to get that training, so if they use deadly force, they don't lose their house, they don't get sued. Whether they win or not, they're going to face hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of civil actions that they have to pay for. Under his amendment, if you take the class, you get that immunity. So it was a two-part. One, the original bill was completely altered. It was strictly for parades. It was strictly 50 feet from the center line of the road, and it matched with the people who currently have a constitutional permit, a carry permit. It was matching that for those people who were carrying. And in that instance, I stood with the law enforcement officers on that.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the hot seat on that one. All right, Chris. Louisiana has a long track record of difficulty with transparency and accountability in government. You alluded to that a little bit ago. Are we making any progress when it comes to transparency?
I think we are making marginal progress when it comes to transparency, but not enough. And I think one of the chief frustrations that Louisiana citizens have, and there are citizens across the state that are members of our organization who express this, they do not believe that their government and that their representatives often are responsive to their concerns. Again, it appears as though too often they run on certain principles and certain ideas, and they too often govern on ideas and principles that are inconsistent with the interests of their citizens. And I understand, because I see it every day, the pressure of the big special interest groups in the legislature and how they attempt to influence our elected leaders. And that's how we exist, to make sure that the citizens' voice in the legislature is just as strong as the big, powerful special interest groups. And it's so very important, because the level of frustration in our government is probably at an all-time high right now. So to answer your question, I'm not Mr. Doom and Gloom. I think I'm sitting up here with a good group of representatives. But to answer your question, I don't feel like we've made nearly enough progress when it comes to transparency in our government. There was a bill this past session, House Bill 461, that was brought by Stephen Jackson, a Democrat from up in Shreveport, that if it had passed in original form, which did pass the House, but if it had passed in original form, it would have concealed negotiations between local governments and private contractors, millions and millions of dollars of our taxpayer money, regarding these negotiations, where the money is going to go, how it's going to be spent. And in the original version of the bill, you wouldn't have been able to find out about those negotiations for a substantial period of time after they were concluded. And we're sitting here thinking, this is our money. This is taxpayer money. Why should a taxpaying citizen ever be excluded from information and knowledge about the negotiation of their money between a local government and a private contractor? It should never happen. It's a transparency bill. Fortunately, because of a lot of hard work by a lot of citizens, the bill ended up in much better form. And at this point, it has to go before a local government, elected officials on the local government level, consistent with the open meetings law, before it can be approved and the contract be ratified. But that's just an example of transparency, and it's very important that the citizens have access to how their money is being spent, and nothing is concealed from them. I would say there's another item of legislation I mentioned a minute ago, HB 103, which is very, very good transparency, because it allows parents and citizens to see what's going on through live stream in local government meetings, school board meetings, and that sort of thing. And that's very important. There is, and one final bill that I wanted to mention here was HB 962.
which started off simply as a bill that would have provided for how local boards of election supervisors, how they vote. These are the people who count the absentee ballots. These are the people who process votes as they come in. Well, there was an amendment attached to that bill that would have prohibited any recording whatsoever, any videoing of the processes of the local boards of election supervisors and the process by which they count the absentee ballots, the early votes, and that sort of thing. And fortunately, Senator Miguez worked very diligently to revise that so at this point, what's authorized is to have a camera in the rooms where the local boards of election supervisors meet that can record, that can document what they're doing and how they're doing it there. But as far as citizens being able to go in with a video camera and all that, they can't do it. But Senator Miguez did a very good job. So there will be transparency there. I simply believe that we have a lot of work to do nonetheless in order to make our citizens completely satisfied that their government is being completely open with them about what they're doing and completely transparent. And that's why we exist, and that's why we're there.
Thank you, Chris.
If I could, I'd like to say something on Senator Jackson's bill. What the bill talked about was the concealment when they were dealing with the Louisiana Economic Development Group. At this table, Senator Miguez works in the midstream oil and gas industry, and Senator Fesi works in the pipeline industry. I think all but one of us here voted yes for the bill in its original form, but I want to go to this. In St. John the Baptist Parish, which is where probably 30% of the people in my community work at the plant, there's a plant that's trying to come here called Greenfield. It's a grain elevator where they're going to take Louisiana's grain and ship it across up the Mississippi River and across the world. Through public records, George Soros was able to get copies of that negotiation and has spent over $3 million. This is the guy funding Joe Biden. He was able to get $3 million. We 5 years in this project, thousands of jobs, and we haven't been able to lift that job up off the ground because George Soros was able to get that. So there has to be a balance. When we start talking about oil and gas and bringing plants and distributors and pipelines, these liberal groups are clogging the way. They're filing early lawsuits, they're filing early TROs, and they're stopping our progress through getting some of this. So it wasn't like we're trying to conceal, but there has to be some type of balance where George Soros, well, how do you say his name, doesn't come here and shut down what was going to be good high-paying jobs for a grain elevator. And what they're playing is it's next to a slave place in Wallace, and that's what they've played to shut down Greenfield. And you can look it up. He is the master funder of shutting down that project, and he was able to get that jump start on us through public records in St. John the Baptist. So, yeah.
Representative Fontenot, I certainly understand what you're saying, and I know that agencies throughout our government are at times overwhelmed by these third-party groups from out of state who are making these public records requests. So I think a simple solution to that problem would have been to require in that circumstance you be domiciled in the state of Louisiana to make the public records request. That way you would shut that down, but you would not shut down a citizen's access to negotiations regarding their money, is all I'm saying. And I think you just have to be very, very careful to make sure that whatever we do, we're not compromising the citizen's right to know what's going on in government negotiations. I know you're sensitive to that, and I would simply ask going forward, and I probably would have supported this bill in its final form as amended. But I didn't support it in its original form for reasons that I just stated. And I appreciate your being honest about the fact that you did.
But Mr. Alexander, if you just wanted to put it for a Louisiana resident, all I have to do is hire a local attorney who's a Louisiana resident. He can do the same.
So that's actually what they done. They actually put on payroll some ladies from this Wallace community and make it. But so look, I guess my point is this. It's not always as black and white as sometimes you think it is, right? It's a delicate balance for us. Look, we haven't gained a congressman, Blake, in how long? 30 plus years, and as we head into the next redistricting, we're liable to lose another one. That means our children, our people, our businesses, they're leaving Louisiana. And if we continue to allow radicals who are against oil and gas, right, they against the Mississippi River, they against our natural resources to beat us, we could close up shop. Before long, we're gonna have 2 congressmen. So it's a tough balance for us, and I agree with Chris. You gotta be domiciled here, but the gentleman's right. What they did is hire someone, they got the records, and the owner, actually know the owner from California. He's a Tulane graduate. He's probably spent somewhere to 10 or 12 million dollars trying to fight this to bring jobs to Louisiana.
I just think we have to be very, very careful, and I know you're sensitive to this, when it comes to denying Louisiana citizens access to how their money is being spent. I know you understand that, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
All right, well, we're gonna move on because I have a half-inch thick stack of index cards that we need to get to. So we're gonna try and get through as many of these as humanly possible. So try and keep it tight. Y'all are doing a great job. All right, first one is, how does a citizen, and this is for anybody who wants to answer, how does a citizen request a bill to address a certain issue?
What was the question again?
How does a citizen request a bill be created to address a certain issue that concerns them?
Well, I would say that they would need to talk to their representative, their senator. That's kind of how my vaccine bill started. People approached me, asked me what we could do to solve the problems that we had, and we wrote the legislation, and even though it took 3 years, we did pass it. So I would say that I mean, and if you don't know, I'm sure you people do, but I'm amazed at how many people I talk to that have no idea who their representative is, and certainly not their senator. So it's just educating the public to know who is responsible, who you have elected to be your voice is so very important.
Cool, thank you. All right, do you want to add something to that? Okay, you're the holder of the mic, got it, okay. What will the legislature be doing to simplify the tax code and promote economic development?
Send that to Fesi. He's on checks.
So, I guess if you want it, okay, I'll take it.
If it was up to me, I'd go to a sales tax and get rid of income tax. I guess they've been hearing me say that. So anyway, I think the fairest way to do it is because you have a lot of different transactions or, different ways. And for us just to worry about on who's having income tax, a lot of people work for cash, in different ways. And that if everybody pays just raise the sales tax to make up the difference, everybody's paying the equal share. The people who make more money are going to pay more tax, and it would work so much smoother. So that would be my fix. Thank you.
All right.
Would you like me to say?
Yeah, please.
So the question was, how do you spur economic development and tax reform? So the governor laid out some of his priorities, and we talked about some earlier, crime, education, but one of the big ones was creating an economy that was going to solve Louisiana's greatest problem. And if you guys know what that problem is, it's our migration problem. We're losing our youngest and our brightest and talented children who grow up as adults to other states. And if you look at the statistics in 2022, they had 1.4 million people move to the South, moving out of California, moving out of Illinois, moving out of all these liberal states to live in a great culture in South, but I didn't say South Louisiana, because in Louisiana at the same time we lost 48,000 people. Well, why is that? We got the best people, we got the best food, we got great music, we got agriculture, we've got the oil and gas industry, we got a tourism industry, the list goes on and on. Lack of jobs, lack of economic opportunities. Well, look at other states that used to be at the bottom. Tennessee, North Carolina, what do? The first thing you do is you get your spending growth, government spending under control. You stop growing that faster than the private sector. And I'm proud to report that of this $50 billion budget, when you look at the state effort, it only grew by 1%. That's contrary to under John Bell Edwards' administration, where it was growing at 3 to 5%. So that shortfall we were talking about that you keep hearing about, $500 million that we're going to talk about next year, has now been reduced to $275 million. So that's step one. Step two is you have to put yourself in a position to do comprehensive tax reform. Well, how we're set up is we got a 4-year term, right? The governor is still in his honeymoon phase. He gets a lot of what he wants in the first and the second year of the term. It generally starts dissipating sometimes in the 3rd year. And in the 4th year, you don't really do much because everybody's running for re-election. It's a lot of talk, not a lot of walk, right? Well, we only get one opportunity before the election year to do tax reform, and that's next spring. But in order to get in a position where the legislature has all the tools necessary to do comprehensive tax reform and not put us in a situation where we're always cutting higher ed or health care, you have to unlock your Constitution and provide all the tools necessary to have those conversations. And then you can look at doing things like if he favors the sales tax over getting rid of the personal income tax. What about the franchise tax? What about the ad valorem tax, which is crazy on how that process works? But what about how local government is funded versus coming to the state? All of the great things that we can talk about, but it's a process, and you have to have some kind of constitutional convention or change constitutional large amendments to get there, so when we go into session in the springtime, we can have a tax reform session. Remember North Carolina used to be at the bottom, one of the top 10 performing economies in the entire nation. They did comprehensive tax reform when they had Republicans in charge. The Democrats fought them like crazy. And then we were talking about how we had surpluses during COVID of like $2 or $3 billion. Those guys had like $10 billion. And I can tell you the Democrats are now wanting to spend that money with them in their communities. But where do we want to spend that money? Infrastructure, crime prevention, things that make sense. And that's how you get to it. You got to make sure the legislature has the right tools. And it's a process. And Governor Landry, if the legislature gives Governor Landry what he needs to get the job done, I think he'll lead us in the right direction.
Great.
One of the issues that I'm passionate about in taxes is that we all pay. So I'm going to read off a couple of things and I want you to think to yourself, should that person pay sales tax? Should the person who owns an off-track betting facility when they buy materials, should they have to pay sales taxes? You probably thought no, they don't. They're exempt. When the Superdome remodels itself, a dome or stadium in the state of Louisiana, New Orleans Saints pay for it. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. You think they should pay sales taxes? When you buy exotic paintings, you think you should pay sales taxes? When we're talking about, and I want you to know there's 499 of these. When you rent a room in your house or a retreat facility, you don't pay sales taxes. That goes on for loggers, paper mills, farmers, feminine products, gasoline, things that Miguez puts on his boats. Some of those are important to us, but this is what I want you to know. You pay a 4.45% sales tax, a state sales tax right now, 4.45%. If these 499 things, they all paid, your sales tax would go down by 200%. We could collect the same amount of money and only charge 2%. So we as a state have to go back and examine all of these free things we give away. And that's the way we can fix ourselves. We don't need to raise taxes. We just have to stop giving money away for free and make everyone pay. You pay 4.45. The guy who goes to the Superdome, he should pay 4.5. Everybody should pay the same thing. And we could collect the same amount of money if everybody paid. So I think that's an initiative we should look at.
All right, well, Rep. Amedee, oh, you want to say
I
something?
just wanted to say, Representative Neil Reiser had some legislation this past session to abolish the individual state income tax and contends that it can be done in a revenue-neutral way. There are other states that have abolished the state income tax, and they're doing quite well. The individual state income tax, our group supports abolishing the individual state income tax in Louisiana. From what I understand from talking to Representative Reiser, when he talks to legislators, in the hallway and at the Capitol, all of them support abolishing the individual state income tax. It can be done, and I think it should be done. It's time the individual, hardworking Louisiana tax-paid citizen that's taxed to death gets some relief from the personal income tax. And we support it, and we're going to continue to advocate for it.
Pass it to Rep. Amedee, if you don't mind.
I know that there are other questions, so I don't want to take long on this, and I agree with what my colleagues and all have said up here. but I just wanted to point something out that wasn't touched on, two things actually. I would love to abolish the income tax also, but you heard him say the words revenue neutral. Revenue neutral is what it would take to get enough votes for it to pass the legislature. Revenue neutral means if we're going to take away the state income tax, we're going to have to raise taxes somewhere else to keep government funded at the same level. Revenue neutral means the state doesn't lose any revenue. That's nice because you'll benefit from having no income tax, but you're going to pay it somewhere else as long as it's revenue neutral. So one of the things that we really need to also push for is this: smaller government, smaller government. As long as we're paying for everything. We heard a lot over the last 2 terms under Governor Edwards. If you remember in 2016 when Governor Edwards came in and I came in and some of my colleagues came in, we were facing a $2 billion shortfall. And over the course of Governor Edwards' term, he fixed that shortfall. We weren't in a negative condition anymore. And he's going to take a lot of the credit for that, and he's going to say that we did some great things. The reality is we didn't, because under Governor Edwards, one major thing that he did was he got us into Medicaid expansion. And as you know, when you start paying for things for people, it's really hard to rein that back in because nobody wants to give it up. Well, we also experienced a worldwide pandemic and a hurricane here locally. That means that a whole lot of federal money came rolling in. And Louisiana is probably the most dependent state on federal revenue coming in. Our budget is about 50% federal revenue. Now, those dollars are your tax dollars and mine also, but as long as Louisiana is so heavily dependent on the federal government, we're still not going to be able to rein in government and right-size it and make government only pay for what government's really supposed to be paying for. So stay tuned.
Okay, perfect. Okay, this one we're going to do by a raise of hands since this is such a contentious issue. Do you expect we will see the state income tax removed next year? Raise your hand if you think yes. All right.
Well, just real quickly, that's probably, it's because of the fiscal note that's associated with it. You have the votes to eliminate it, it's just to pay for it, and it's probably going to be a phased-in process, just like Mississippi started. So it's depends on how much available dollars you have, and when you're in a situation when you're looking at a deficit, it makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Will we have a special session to address some of the constitutional constraints around the budget?
You're saying a constitutional convention or special session?
Yeah, kind of, I guess a special session or a constitutional convention, whatever it's going to take to address those issues.
It's been rough because the Senate's been really tough on the constitutional convention idea. The Senate president walked in the room and said there was only like 2 or 3 senators who supported it. I looked around and I said, that must just be me and Mike. And, and Valerie. But I can tell you that the idea is not completely dead. It was brought, HB 800 was brought through the House of Representatives. It wasn't heard. Chairman Fields decided he didn't want to hear it in SG&A. But that wouldn't have mattered much because I think the Senate really wasn't in an appetite to be there just yet. I asked Representative Boyer about it recently. He's our chairman of House and Governmental Affairs. He's still having conversations with the governor and the speaker. Some of the hearings that they're having are to bring light to the future challenges that our state will face on both the revenue and the spending side of things. It's not completely dead yet. There's still ideas floating around. I think we need to wait and see how the summer percolates and see what type of hearings get heard. But if we're going to do anything in a constitutional convention to follow that plan that I mentioned to you earlier to make the fiscal session next year, we have to get that done by August 23rd, roughly, because we want to have that on the ballot when Donald Trump's on the ballot, so the more people in the state can weigh in on the presidential ballot and tell us what you really think about this. And time is running short, and we'll have to wait and see. That the jury's still out on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. The thing with the Constitutional Convention, 89% of all the funds for the state are tied up in the Constitution, and we get to deal with the budget with 11% of the money. So that's why it needs to be opened up. But the problem of it is what I kept hearing in the Senate is nobody knows whether we can open it up just to do certain things to it unless you open the whole thing up and leave everything open where other things can get changed. So I never did get a good answer from any lawyer to tell you, so I started digging up. And I noticed Huey Long, when he wanted the new Capitol, he held a constitutional convention just to get the bill passed to get the new Capitol. So it has been done. So I just hope that we can come to a conclusion to where we could pick out just the items we need to fix and go in and do that. And then we would be able to fix the way the budget is and be able to probably cut back on government because there's so much waste with that 89%. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I got one thing to add about the Constitutional Convention. All these concerns about it opening it up and then we're going to lose our Second Amendment rights. I'm the biggest Second Amendment guy in the legislature, okay? Or it's going to have an issue with pro-life issues, whatever it may be. We got to remember, this Constitutional Convention is structured a little differently. The people that they're talking about bringing into the convention under a bicameral or tricameral setup is the legislature. So do you think the legislature would ever vote to get rid of any of those protections or do any of these things? It's not like in the past where you've been in a situation where you're going to go out and elect new people there and then the people are going to weigh in where you could lose control of the convention. You can't lose control of it. I'm not so concerned about the enabling legislation because we are the convention. So if we can't trust ourselves, then and you need the type of voting thresholds that you need, I'm not as concerned about it. I think a lot of it has to do with just status quo, resistant to change, resistant to come in and change this Constitution, to do the fiscal things necessary to fix this state, to put us on the right track to be maybe North Carolina or Tennessee or Texas or Florida in 10 years from now, where we can bring our children back here and have jobs for them and have a thriving economy.
I'd like to add, too, that it really doesn't matter at the end of everything whether the Constitutional Convention would change anything horrible, because it won't pass unless and until you get to vote on it. That's the whole purpose, is to get it done fast enough to put on the ballot for the voters statewide. So you get the final say.
Would it be a bunch of ballot initiatives or would it be a single one?
It depends. If you held a special session that dealt with constitutional amendments, then you could take them with ballot initiatives. You determine a whole convention, they'd be a single instrument. Just depends on how they want to do it. But remember, Beryl brings up a great point. It's a vote of the people, but I can tell you that if the voting thresholds are where they are and how conservative this legislature is, and the fact that the folks that are doing the enabling legislation are also the people that are writing the Constitution, and then the governor gets his 28 people to protect his powers, it's either it's going to get done the right way or nothing's going to get done at all.
Yeah, okay. Okay, here's a question from Facebook Live. How does the money follow the child with the new ESA?
The ESA bill that just passed and the governor just signed yesterday, the money would follow the child by the parent applying and assuming that the student is eligible. The parent would be able to utilize the funds by spending that money with authorized service providers. So if the parent felt that their child needed, let's say, an algebra tutor, then the money would go to the algebra tutor. If the parent felt the child needed to enroll in a private school, then the money would go to the private school in the form of tuition.
Okay, thank you. Okay, actually, hold on to the mic. This one is a question for you. Rep. Amedee, you have made much effort to protect and promote the French language in Louisiana. What measures are you looking to take in the future to continue preserving our heritage?
Merci beaucoup for that question. I have a passion for trying to do whatever we can to promote and expand the French language, Louisiana French, and French culture, because I believe that it's important to do two things. Keep it alive for the sake of our heritage, but also to reverse a trend, an error that the government made. My grandparents, who were from Thibodeau, their first language was French. My great-grandparents spoke no English at all. But when my grandparents went to public school as children, they were actually physically punished if they spoke a word of French on the school grounds. That is the main reason that the French language in Louisiana had almost completely disappeared. And I have seen a lot of effort in Senator Miguez's area to promote and keep this alive, and there are now 2 generations of young people who are learning the French language, just history, crafts, and music and the culture. And I think we've all done a pretty good job keeping the food alive, but I haven't personally seen that same level of effort in my House district. I haven't seen that same level of excitement and effort in Terrebonne and Lafourche specifically. And so that's what drives me to try and bring that here, because we have Cajun people all over the state, but predominantly in the southern half of the state, and I don't want to see just Lafayette and Breaux Bridge get all the fun. We have Cajuns here in Thibodaux and Houma and down the bayous, and I want to be sure that all of our heritage is promoted and kept alive. It's not just personal, it's not just my heritage and a lot of yours. I believe that this is something that makes Louisiana unique among states. This is good for our economy. This is good because it promotes tourism. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits. I think it's like the low-hanging fruit in Louisiana that people in charge haven't caught on to yet. People come to Louisiana for our food, our music, and all this. So why not promote it? Why not help to keep it alive? Because once it's gone, and I don't think you're going to be able to revive it. So that's my passion. So what am I going to do? Well, let's see. One of the bills that I carried this year was to improve the process by which parents can request foreign language immersion programs in their school districts. I think it still needs to be improved. The bill did not survive this session, but I believe that it woke up certain people and brought them to the table. So I think we can see that bill again. I don't know for sure if it'll be next year because we'll be in a limited session. And if it doesn't come back next year, then certainly the year after. I think that's important. And whatever else I can do. I'm personally, even at my age, trying to learn more of the language. My grandparents are gone. I can't speak with them now. But I have a younger sister who is a Louisiana French specialist. She has a doctorate in this. And she works over in your district, Senator Miguez, at a tourism place that promotes Cajun culture and heritage and history. And I would like to be sure that our state tourism department doesn't forget about those kinds of tourist sites. So that's another thing that I'll personally be working on. I'll be bugging Billy Nungesser and saying, hey, have you ever toured this facility? Come see.
I bet he will.
I'm going to see if I can bring Senator Miguez and his whole family too.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. All right, next one is for Senator Fesi. Can you talk about your seafood safety bill? What will it mean for local industry?
Okay, it was SB 62. The governor signed it Tuesday. What it does is basically we take domestic seafood and imported seafood and separate it on the way you're going to do testing. A lot of us don't pay attention to all the imported seafood that's really ruined our seafood industry here in Louisiana. We're buying imported seafood and putting our shrimpers down. Probably you're paying a fifth of what you used to pay for 10 years ago for the shrimp. And the poisons that's in the imported seafood with antibiotics and everything else that's in it, they're raising a lot of the crawfish and the shrimp in sewer ponds. And they're shipping it here to the United States, and our federal government is failing us here again. In Europe, they test 50% of all imported seafood. Do you have a guess of what the U.S. tests? Less than 1%. So guess what? If you had a business plan, where would you send all of the trash? You would send it to the one that only tests less than 1%. And they know if they throw 1% out, they're still making plenty of money, and that's what's putting our seafood industry out of business in Louisiana. So my bill separates the two. It creates a fund to put money into a fund, and I've got with Billy Nungesser, and we've worked hard on putting this program together because it was hard fighting all the, I guess, the lobbyists from the restaurant suppliers. Because they said, well, what are we going to supply to the restaurants? I said, well, my thing is you rather supply inferior seafood or nothing at all, So I'm sure that our domestic seafood operators build their business back. Most of your shrimpers only have one shrimp boat now instead of 5 or 6. So the industry will go back with time as we put this in force. And the biggest important thing of it all is I had Billy, promise me that he's going to start advertising that Louisiana will have the safest seafood in the nation since the U.S. government's failing us.
That's awesome. Okay, Senator Miguez, you brought a bill to prohibit ranked choice voting in Louisiana. This is a much needed protection for our elections. Can you talk about ranked choice voting and why this is so important?
Yes, I mean, it's SB 101. So I brought a bill to ban ranked choice voting here in Louisiana. And ranked choice voting is a very complicated ballot process. Basically, it requires you to vote against your core values and beliefs because you have to vote for every candidate on the ballot. And it's an instant runoff. Very complicated. It's unfortunate that it's overly complicated for our elderly community and those who are most vulnerable. And it almost guarantees that ballots are trashed because if you don't fill out the ballot correctly, and let's say you have 10 candidates running, you have to rank them from the first place to the last place. And if somehow you you didn't fill out every vote or you filled it out incorrectly, it's thrown in the trash. And it's known to make elections contested. It takes forever to get the results. In some of these different races, one mayor's race they had in New York, they had nearly 100,000, I believe, that were trashed. So it goes against American values of one person, one vote, because when you go and vote, I want to make sure that your vote counts. And I want to make sure you're voting for the person who you philosophically believe is the best candidate that's going to represent you and your family in the future of our great state and our country, and not requiring you to vote for every candidate on the ballot. And it just manipulates the outcomes. It's un-American. It's just not something that's, I believe, that aligns with American values, and I'm proud to be an author of the bill. And we made sure and sent a strong policy statement that it'll never be policy here in Louisiana.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is another roll call vote. I know we don't want y'all to get out of practice. Soon we will be purchasing a new voting election machine system. Would you support a requirement that all parts, software, and manufacturing originate in the U.S.? Raise your hand if you say yes. All right, cool. Go ahead.
There was a bill, an amendment to a bill this session that was offered by Senator Thomas Presley that would have required that all components of machine-based voting systems be manufactured strictly and solely in the United States of America, not by China, our enemy, or any other country, so that those machines can be manipulated, adjusted, hacked, and all the rest of it. The most important issue that we face right now as a state and as a country is the integrity of our election system. If the only As important as Senator Miguez's bill is regarding ranked choice voting, I testified in favor of it. I'm so glad that we passed it. As important as integrity in the absentee ballots is, as important as all the other provisions of voting are, if machines can be manipulated, if machines can be hacked or adjusted, and votes can be switched back and forth remotely, which every cybersecurity expert in the world has said can be done, one of whom testified right in front of the Louisiana Voting System Commission and recommended that Louisiana use secure hand-marked paper ballots with the exception of the disabled who do not have the ability to mark a hand count ballot. That's Alex Haldeman. There is no viable dispute anymore among the cyber experts that sophisticated criminal hackers can, do, and will hack our machine-based voting system. Look what happened to the Louisiana DMV a year ago. The entire system was hacked into. It is time to understand the vulnerabilities of that system and to begin a transition away from it. And it is time to inform the Louisiana Secretary of State that it's critically important that we transition away from machines and not spend $120 million of our money on new voting machines that can be manipulated. It's a fact, it's a reality. And I'm confident that everybody that I'm sitting up here on this stage supports secure hand-marked paper ballots with the exception of the disabled. I'd be surprised if any of them don't support that, but I don't want to speak for them.
No, I think we all raised our hand. I think we all support that. Look, I've heard from the clerk of courts. I've heard from the registers. Oh, you're not going to get election results that night. Okay. I'd rather be certain we got it right 3 days
We don't
later.
anyway.
So-
We don't get them that night anyway.
We wait weeks now, Representative Fontenot. We wait weeks. But anyway, yeah.
All right. Okay, this one is for Representative Edmonston. Your bill this session for off-label prescribing failed in the Senate committee. Will you bring it back next year? Maybe talk about it a little bit as well, what it would have done.
Okay, well, basically it was a bill to strengthen the doctor-patient relationship. And what it said was if a doctor prescribes an FDA-approved drug that is not necessarily for the condition that it was, initially created for, and the patient agrees that that should be something that no medical commission or committee or board should interfere with. And that should have passed.
It should have.
It really should have. It's a common sense bill, and as we know during COVID, we saw what happened. There were many doctors that wanted to have their patients, take the drugs that we all know, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and it didn't happen. And that was because the radical boards got involved and tried to interfere in a job that was really not theirs to interfere with.
Yeah.
So either myself or someone will definitely bring that back next year.
Great.
We're thinking that we might start it in the Senate because that's where everything starts. If we can get it out of there, I know we can get it out of the House. So,
Awesome. It's a great bill. Thank you. Okay, this is a thank you to Representative Amedee and Senator Fesi for being co-authors of the bill that makes abortion drugs dangerous substances. Thank you. I believe that was Senator Presley's coerced abortion bill. Yeah, fantastic. We're a pro-life state.
He fought hard for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you expect the committees will be the same, or will there be changes for next session? Find out when you get there.
You're talking about the committee assignments for members? I mean, it's
Yeah.
always subject to change if members leave the legislature, get elected to other offices, or just some change in the governor's agenda. We're not privy to that. Obviously, I'm not the president of the Senate. But the president and the speaker make all those determinations. They can remove anybody at any time and change anyone around, and it never stays the same throughout a whole term. So it's subject to a lot of different factors.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. This is a question for Beryl. With term limits, what's your next assignment?
I'm still listening for God's voice. I don't know. There'll be options. I think it's a little early to decide for sure. With term limits, most people would expect that I'll go from House to Senate. I'm not committing to that right now. I don't know if that's what I'll do. There's all kinds of possibilities. I mean, 3 years is a while, and I'm open to many possibilities. One thought is go to Washington. One thought is go home and play with the grandbabies. One thought is grow my business. Who knows? I'll just walk through whatever doors God opens when the time comes.
Can we just start the chant now? Congress. Congress.
Well, some people have been chanting governor or governor, and I've been saying no. So don't worry about that one. God would have to bring a hand out and write governor on the wall, and bad things happened to the last guy that waited for the hand. But he had already put in my thoughts that Congress could be sometime in my future. But honestly, if I'm going to do everything that God has shown me that is on my to-do list for him, I'll probably have to live to be about 107, but that's up to God. And speaking about Congress, let me just take another 20 seconds and say this. There's often a lot of talk, and we even saw at least one bill this legislative session concerning campaign contributions. One bill that I think we passed actually increased the contribution limits, and a lot of people reached out and fussed about that, like it was taxpayer money or something. And it's like, oh my goodness. Everything has gone up in price since the campaign contribution limits were set so many years ago. TV airtime, print mailers, all these things have gone up in price. So I just wanted to say that if we don't increase campaign contribution limits, we will eventually reach a point in time where only the rich can run. And then alongside that concept is this. I hear a lot, especially from grassroots, about people who are in elected office who take a lot of money, campaign contributions from special interest groups. Well, you know, I'll pretty much take a campaign contribution from anybody. I've only turned down 2. It doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily vote the way they want. Ask some of them. They're probably not pleased with me now. Then others are. But here's the deal. Most of the people who complain about people like us receiving campaign contributions from lobbying groups or special interest groups are also people who have not made campaign contributions. So I'm saying all that to say this. Campaign money doesn't go very far. So if there are candidates that you really want to see in office, start early, helping them fundraise, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That was a good public service announcement. Okay, were there any disciplinary actions taken against legislators who were openly hostile to witnesses in the committee hearings? Doesn't.
Well, I could just shed some bad, it didn't happen on your side.
I think that what the able questioner is alluding to is a bill, House Bill 777. It was brought by Representative Kelly Hennessy Dickerson, and the bill simply would have severed Louisiana's financial relationship with the American Library Association, which is a notoriously left-leaning Marxist organization whose founder believes in certain things that would absolutely shock you, including providing children with, to put it quite euphemistically, quite inappropriate material in public school libraries throughout the state. So Representative Hennessy's bill simply would have severed Louisiana's relationship with that organization. I would bet that 90% of Louisiana citizens would be 100% on board with that, without question, not subject to local decision-making, but subject to state law, that we are not going to be providing taxpayer money to this organization anymore. Well, it went before the House Parochial and Municipal Affairs Committee, and it was a complete fiasco in that committee room, despite, quite frankly, the efforts of the gentleman sitting to my right, who tried to facilitate some kind of control in the room there. But the way the Representative Hennessy was treated by the Democrat members of that committee was atrocious. There was a hot mic moment where Representative Denise Marcel was caught using vile profanity in order to kill this legislation, huddled up. She didn't realize she was on a hot mic. Our able LACAG member and Great American, Nathan Koenig, who happens to be here with us. By the way, I think you need to get the Best Dressed Award in Louisiana tonight, Nathan. Wrote a very scathing and informative article about what happened in that committee hearing. The question was there any disciplinary action taken against those members of the committee who acted so unprofessionally and in such an unbecoming way? And quite frankly, I have not heard that there was any disciplinary action taken against any of them, but I can assure you that if it had been a Republican acting in such a manner, and we had a Democrat governor and a Democrat-controlled House, I guarantee you, even a Republican speaker probably would have taken disciplinary action, like happened to Ray Garofella a couple of years ago when he did far less and was removed from committee. So it's unfortunate. I don't think any action was taken. These folks up here may or may not know differently, but I think it's sad if it wasn't.
All right. Okay, can you address obscenity in public school libraries?
Yes, so that was actually Representative Amedee's bill, and
it came in front of the municipal committee. Let's go back to the question about committee assignments. I pray to God they take me off this municipal committee because it's so liberal. It's ridiculously horrible to be on this committee. So Representative Amedee's got a bill that talks about obscenity in books in the library. And at the time, the chairman wasn't there, and I think Representative Freiberg was in the chair, but nevertheless, they had got Amedee to defer the bill. Well, then the librarians came up, and long story short is, we made a motion to move that bill forward. I made a motion to help get the bill out of committee so we could get it on the floor. I don't know if arresting librarians is the correct avenue, but at some point, somebody in the public school system has to be held accountable if they have vulgarity or they have obscenity in books in children's library. And that, it doesn't matter to me. I've never been 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade. It should be in any grade at this point. It talks about how to identify your sex. Well, unless we let them read the 10 Commandments and send them to the Bible and talking to God, they should know what their sex is. They don't need to go into the library and figure it out. So that's kind of how that bill made it. That was Beryl's bill. I would assume you'll see something come back about that pretty soon.
Okay. Oh.
Okay. And thank you to Rep. Fontenot for acting. In that committee hearing, there was a different library bill that had been heard an hour, I guess, before my bill came up. And whenever we were talking about my bill and people were so concerned about putting librarians in jail, I was willing to voluntarily defer so we could possibly remove the penalty section from the bill and see if it would still pass. But whenever the acting chair called for the opposition to come to the table and the members saw that they were going to have to sit through one more round of the kind of testimony that they had previously heard, which nobody in this room would have enjoyed, the committee decided amongst themselves, and they said, we have the votes. Is it okay if we move your bill? And I said, yes. So that's how the bill got moved. But I have to tell you about the bill. I held the bill after it cleared committee and I think the floor. I held the bill. I didn't continue to schedule it because in our state statutes, I believe that every sane and reasonable person who reads the obscenity definition would agree that, yes, that's obscene. The problem is, in that same statute, there is an exception for something that is that has artistic merit or literary value. And what I found was that in certain other states, some of these very egregious books had been awarded by probably certain nonprofit groups with certain alphabet names who exist for the purpose of simply awarding books like that. And so if someone pushed the issue and they found one of these horrible books in a public school library and they took the book to court saying, we want this book to remain in the library, a very liberal judge could look at the book and it had won an award and claim that it now had literary value. And if that would happen, somebody would go and buy a copy of that book for every public school library in the state and be sure and stash it there. So until I can come up with language that will overcome the artistic merit or literary value argument without violating free speech laws, I will not bring the bill back for fear of the scenario that I just described. But on the question of putting a librarian in jail, the problem we have is when people think of librarians, and this is going to date me, people think of Aunt B. You know Aunt B?
Yeah.
Who would want to put Aunt B in jail? Well, I have to tell you, I'm a grandmother, and I don't care if Aunt B hands one of my grandchildren some of those egregious books. I consider Aunt B now a groomer, and she can go to jail. So that's where I stand on it.
Okay, what can be done for a parish that doesn't have 911 ambulance service?
As far as I know, every parish should have a 911 ambulance service. I can tell you that in the fire service right now, we're having a lot of problems with response times on ambulances, to the point where the state recently, Senator Fesi done this to try to help Bayou Cane in this community, where the state's put up about $1.1 million to buy ambulances for Bayou Cane Fire Department so they could expedite in this community. And it's been so successful, they're starting to go into Houma, they're starting to go into Shreva. So I think everyone has 911 service in the state of Louisiana. Ambulance service is an issue, and I think in Terrebonne, Mike's made a huge step in under Chief Ken Email's guidance to get 2 ambulances in Bayou Cane.
Okay. This one is less of a question and more of a comment, so I'll just maybe try and sum it up with, it seems like it's an encouragement for the legislators to not agree with the premise of the people that you're debating. So if you're in debate with someone on a different side of the issue, to not necessarily fall into the trap of agreeing with their premise. Who would be willing to work to get the legislative website made more user-friendly for the public? We need to be able to have more transparency in committee votes.
I think we've done a large step in that. Last year, we had some concerns when Miguez was in charge of the Republican Party, and under Miguez's leadership, we created an app. So there's a legislative app now that's pretty easy to navigate, and it brings you instantly to live footage so you can see. Obviously, we still run into concerns that people just don't have the ability to reach us. But if you got to go to, legis.la.gov, it is hard to navigate. But the app, the Louisiana House app, is significantly easier to get exactly what you want.
Okay. I would say, the Senate doesn't record their committee votes. They don't. Mm-mm. So I would like to see a resolution next year, perhaps, for that to be made public.
I thought they were all recorded too. Some of them are not public. You gotta, that's one of the issues about transparency. You gotta find those votes, but I thought they were all recorded.
Mm-mm. Not all the Senate votes. They're not on the website. Yeah.
One of our members and supporters, John Toops, who I believe is here, has brought up some great ideas. Have we left? Yeah. Okay. Brought up some great ideas about how to make the legislative website more accessible and user-friendly to citizens. And so I think we're going to present that to y'all. Y'all have always been very receptive to try to do that. One point I want to make on this, speaking of the transparency issue and accessibility to what legislators do, I know in the Senate that there is something called the Bagneris rule, which has been explained to me in various ways, none of which has been entirely satisfactory. Perhaps one of the senators here can explain it, but I just want to say this. Is it true? Because if this is true, and I think it is true, it's something that needs to change immediately. The idea that a senator, when a bill is called on the Senate floor, can register an anonymous objection to that bill being called, and the only person who knows which senator is objecting to that bill being called is the senator who objects and the president of the Senate. And bills get killed that way, and I think that the public should have a right to know each and every time any senator casts any vote or makes any action or to block the hearing of a piece of legislation. So I wanted to hear from the senators on that. Is that true, or does the public have a misunderstanding of how that occurs? Because I heard so often this last session a bill be called, a couple of times late and others, and then, sorry, we have an objection, move on. Sorry, we have an objection, move on. So the bill's not called. So
I'd like to get some insight on that as well.
I would too, because they keep deferring my bills. Mike, you got to stop objecting to Representative Fontenot's bills. So I've only been in the Senate for 5 months. I'm learning the process, but what I can ascertain from how the president does the scheduling, it seems like there are certain days he chooses. We may not have that much time that day, so they want to have non-controversial votes. And generally, what the Bagneris rule is for members to basically signal that they have some type of issue, some type of question with the bill because they want to roll through and try to get through the agenda and stay up. I see they'll do that sometimes, and Mike will have to correct me in a second if I'm wrong, once or twice a week, and then they'll have that debate where they'll have all their controversial debates on the same day. So they go through some type of
routine with that. But let me give it to Mike. He's been in the Senate for the whole term. He might be able to give some better statements.
Yeah, the rule comes in handy most of the time, but I know under our new president, under Senator Cameron Henry, he's done a lot better job than what happened in our first term, because I did have some bills that I got upset about on the Bagneris because it puts them off. And as of course, some of the bills I pass are very controversial in some of the situations. So it's got to where this year with Senator Henry as President Henry, is that we're all only doing it a couple of days out the week just to move the bills, because the House sends us, 900 plus bills? So you need to move a lot of the bills just to keep things flowing. So that's why we use Bagneris. So if somebody's going to do a whole objection and cause the bill to be hung up for hours, and when we could run through about 30, 40 bills in that time, it gets it moving. And so on the end of the week, we would normally no Bagneris, and we can catch all those bills, and just to keep things moving. But yes, it can cause some complication if it's abused. So I agree with that, and hopefully I didn't see it this year where it was abused like it was my first term.
All right, thank you. How do we roll back the government overreach into our lives and roll back taxes?
Well, we kind of addressed some of that a little bit when our Constitutional Convention talk about getting rid of the personal income tax. Then we addressed some of that already.
How do we roll back? Are you talking about the federal government?
I think it's broad.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. But I would say that, can we look at Biden's administration and say that we're daily having our rights stripped and our country just absolutely plummeted? So I don't think we can fix the federal government, but I do think that we can really make an impact in Louisiana. And I think those of us here are doing that. Every time we do a bill that we're the first, or makes us our sovereignty important enough to override the federal government, and we're going to do that. We're going to do it. Yeah. And as we do it, other states are going to fall in line and follow us.
And just to point out again, if we take no action next year, the sales tax increase will roll back 0.45%. It rolls off next year. So
awesome.
That's appropriate on the state level.
Great. Okay, this past week, reportedly, a legal firm who is being paid by one of General Mike Flynn's groups, the law firm filed several legal complaints against Anthony Fauci and several parishes, with those DAs. There's a movement to have these sent to the state AG's office. Some of the charges are murder, manslaughter, false imprisonment, RICO charges, and more. Have you heard of this?
Yes, I've heard of it, and I'm very excited about it. During the whole shutdown, I kept screaming, where are the lawsuits? Where are the lawsuits? So I'm happy that we're finally seeing plenty of lawsuits. I'm very happy that in this particular lawsuit, several Louisiana parishes are involved. And the cases are because of the deaths, the damage that's been done. So I plan to follow that very closely, and I'm expecting good outcomes.
Awesome. Yeah, that deserves an impact. Okay, this question is for Chris. It's more of a request. Speak briefly on the importance of Act 480 that was passed in 2021. I think this is probably a reference to the fact that a recent amendment may have taken Act 480 down in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Act 480, was it 2021? Sharon Hewitt's bill. Her bill put into place some safeguards regarding how Louisiana's election system, because we're supposed to be getting an entire new election system, how that process occurs, the checks and balance associated with that process, whether or not any proposed new machine-based voting system is subject to independent third-party forensic audit, where they really tear it down, hide, hair, and guts, and see what the vulnerabilities of that machine are, to get people like Alex Haldeman to look at it. That was in 480. Also, 480 required the Attorney General to approve the certification process. It required legislative oversight over the process. Well, an 11th hour amendment in an otherwise innocuous bill this past session, pushed by the Secretary of State, passed in the House, went over to the Senate, passed in the Senate. Actually, the original innocuous bill passed in the House, then went to the Senate, and at the 11th hour, 4 pages of amendments that essentially eviscerate the checks and balances and protections regarding how we're going to procure the next voting system was put on there at the 11th hour. I don't even think Senator Miguez, I don't even think Senator Fesi, I don't even think they understood what was going on, because Senator Mike Reese stood up there for 30 seconds and falsely, quite frankly, suggested that this is innocuous, and it wasn't. It eviscerated, and Senator Sharon Hewitt, former senator, contacted us and said, are you familiar with what just happened in the Senate? We looked at it very closely and said, this simply is not going to be able to stand. And so once a bill is amended in one chamber, it's got to go back to the other. Senate votes for all these terrible amendments, goes back over to the House, and hundreds and hundreds of emails and communications later, Senator Mike Johnson, it was his original bill, decided that he was going to stuff this into concurrence and kill this horrible these horrible amendments. So that is what, and that is a perfect example of what relentless grassroots citizen advocacy does. And that's what we at LACAG do. That's what we the people do. Moms for Liberty does. And so as of now, we still have reasonable checks and balances in place regarding our next voting system in Louisiana, thank God. And that's what 480 did, and 480 is still intact.
Great. All right. Okay, well, we made it